Hi, everyone. This is Marvin with a follow up from my sermon on Sunday, March 30th. It was a sermon on the parable of the prodigal son, and I made reference to a book by Bernard of Clairvaux in that sermon on loving God. And he describes four different stages of love. And afterward, a couple of you were listening closely and you said, I heard you mention three stages, but not the fourth. What's the fourth stage? So there's a reason why I didn't mention the fourth stage, and I'm going to mention that and explain that now. But first, give you a little bit of background about Bernard himself. He was a monk. He lived in the 12th century. He was a Cistercian monk, which was a new monastic movement in the 12th century. It was devoted toward kind of recapturing what they thought were the original impulses and intents of monasticism to get away from the kind of gaudy and opulent lifestyle of monks in the 11th century and live a simpler life, a life more focused on manual labor and prayer and uh, what we would call today asceticism, denial of sleep, denial of food, in service to God. So Bernard was one of the main advocates for this new, more austere, simpler monastic movement. He was a famous preacher, and because of his preaching and the force of his personality, the Cistercian movement spread throughout France and really throughout Europe during the 12th century. And Bernard wrote a book called On Loving God. And in this book, he says that there are four stages of love that we pass through if we grow and mature in the Christian life. The first stage, he says, is that we love ourselves for our own sake. So this is kind of self centered, um, well, he would not have said narcissistic love, but you get the idea that we ourselves are the end all and be all of our lives. And if our comfort and our power and our well being is maximized, then we're happy. Uh, but Bernard says after a while, you can only go so far with that. And we human creatures are needy, and we discover that we need a higher power if we're going to flourish as human beings. And so we begin to love God for our sake. So we love God for what God can do for us. So maybe a kind of a benign example of this is that old saying, the family that prays together stays together. Um, no doubt, faith in God can be a positive force for our interpersonal relationships, but it's not really about God so much as it is about what God can do for us. The most extreme example of this is the prosperity gospel that we've seen rise over the last 20 years, which makes really crass promises along these lines that if we love God, if we have faith, then God will reward us monetarily. We'll get a raise, we'll win the lottery, we'll get rich. Um, that's the second stage. A little bit better than self centered love. It is focused on God, but it's about loving the gifts of God more than the giver. The third stage is love of God for God's own sake. So we don't love God in the third stage just because of what God does for us. We love God for God's own nature because God is perfect love, perfect power, perfect compassion and peace and holiness. And we simply fall in love with God for God's own sake, apart from the gifts that God gives us or the benefits that a relationship with God brings into our lives. We're just utterly smitten with God. But then there's a fourth stage, and that fourth stage is love of self for God's own sake. So we return, in a sense, to where we began, but at a higher level. And this level, Bernard says, we don't get to until the end of all things and Christ comes again and we are raised, body and soul, into eternal communion with God. And then ourselves, bodies, mind, and spirit, are freed from the vestiges and power of sin, freed from death itself, and we're free to love ourselves not selfishly, but unselfishly because of what God in Christ has done for us and through us, and the great dignity that He has raised us to when He raises us from the dead. So, those are the four stages of Bernard of Clairvaux's On Loving God. Let me know what you think about these stages. Let me know if maybe where you are in your own faith journey. If you have any questions or comments, just shoot me an email, mlindsay at haddonfieldpres.org. Thanks. Have a great day.